The courtroom camera captured an entrance that looked ordinary for only a few seconds, but would soon become one of the most unbelievable moments ever seen in Judge Judy's courtroom. Karen Henderson walked through the double doors, with the confidence of someone who believed the room already belonged to her. Her designer handbag swung from her arm, her hair was perfectly styled, and her expression carried the smug certainty of a woman who thought she had found a way to beat the system. But what made her entrance unforgettable was not Karen alone. Behind her came the man she proudly introduced as her attorney, Michael Bradford. He moved with forced confidence, clutching an oversized briefcase that seemed more like a prop than a professional tool. Karen looked almost delighted as she said the words, "My attorney." As if those two words were enough to intimidate everyone in the courtroom. She believed she had brought a powerful legal weapon with her. She believed she had outsmarted her neighbor. She believed she was about to humiliate an elderly woman on national television. What Karen did not know was that Judge Judy had already been working behind the scenes. The night before the hearing, Judge Judy had made calls, her team had searched records, names had been checked, bar associations had been contacted, and by the time Karen Henderson and Michael Bradford sat down in that courtroom, Judge Judy already knew something they desperately hoped no one would discover. Michael Bradford was not a lawyer, and the question Judge Judy was preparing to ask would not only destroy Karen's case. It would expose a fraud that had been operating for years. Karen had no idea that within minutes, the man she trusted to defend her would be standing in open court, sweating through his cheap suit, unable to answer basic questions about his own legal credentials. She had no idea that the confident attorney beside her would soon be escorted out in handcuffs, and she had no idea that the case she brought to embarrass her neighbor would end with her own name becoming a warning to anyone who tries to use the legal system as a weapon. This was not just a property dispute, this was a story about arrogance, deception, and the moment a fake lawyer walked into the wrong courtroom. To understand how everything reached that point, you have to understand Karen Henderson. Karen was 42 years old, and had spent years terrorizing the quiet suburban neighborhood where she lived outside Phoenix. She was the kind of person who treated every disagreement like a battle, every request like an insult, and every neighbor like an enemy who needed to be defeated. For 3 years people around her had learned to avoid conflict because Karen did not simply argue. She escalated. Her latest target was Maria Chen, a 68-year-old retired teacher who lived next door. Maria was not loud, she was not aggressive. She was a quiet woman who had lived in her home for 15 years. She spent her days tending to a small vegetable garden that helped supplement her fixed income. That garden was more than a hobby, it was part of her routine, part of her peace, and one of the few things she still enjoyed after retirement. At first, Maria and Karen's relationship had been polite. They waved across the driveway, they exchanged short greetings. Nothing seemed unusual. Then Karen began parking her car across Maria's driveway. First Maria ignored it, then it happened again, and again. Eventually, after being inconvenienced one too many times, Maria politely asked Karen to stop blocking access to her own home. That reasonable request became the beginning of a nightmare. Karen did not apologize, she did not move on. Instead, she took the request as a personal attack. And from that moment forward Maria became her target. Karen's response was cruel and deliberate. She hired workers to build a fence between the properties. But this was not just any fence. It was not built on the proper boundary line. It was placed 3 feet into Maria's yard, cutting straight through the garden Maria had cared for years. Tomato plants were destroyed. Herb beds were ripped apart. The small patch of land Maria depended on and loved was suddenly blocked off by a fence Karen had no legal right to build. When Maria confronted her, Karen did not show guilt. She smiled and told Maria that if she had a problem, she could take it to court. That was exactly what Karen wanted. She believed Maria would not have the energy, money, or strength to fight back. She believed the elderly woman would be intimidated into silence, and if Maria did take legal action, Karen believed she had a secret weapon ready. That weapon was Michael Bradford. Karen had found Bradford through a Facebook advertisement. The ad promised legal expertise, courtroom experience, and professional representation at a price far lower than a real attorney would charge. The wording was careful. It sounded official without being specific. It suggested legal authority without clearly proving it. Karen saw what she wanted to see. She was not interested in asking difficult questions. She was interested in winning. And Michael Bradford told her exactly what she wanted to hear. He promised her victory. He claimed he had 15 years of courtroom experience. He told her he knew how to handle judges like Judy Sheindlin. He assured her that Maria had no chance. Karen paid him $3,500 up front. To her, it felt like a smart investment. Maria could not afford that kind of help, and Karen believed the money would give her an advantage. She wanted Maria crushed in court, humiliated on television, and pushed so far down that she would never challenge Karen again. Bradford spent 2 weeks coaching Karen. He gave her phrases that sounded legal but meant very little. He told her how to sit, when to nod, and how to appear calm and confident. He taught her to use terms like property rights, applicable statutes and legal precedent, even though neither of them could properly explain what those words meant in this case. Most importantly, he fed Karen's arrogance. He told her Judge Judy was just a television personality. He said she was no longer a real judge. He said the show was entertainment, that her bark was worse than her bite, and that if they stayed confident, they could control the room. That advice would prove disastrous, because Judge Judy was not just a television personality. Before her television career, she had spent decades as a real judge in New York. She had handled thousands upon thousands of cases. She had seen liars, manipulators, abusers, frauds, and con artists from every possible angle. And if there was one thing she could recognize quickly, it was someone pretending to be something they were not. When Judge Judy's team received the case file and saw that Karen had someone named Michael Bradford from Bradford Legal Services representing her, something immediately seemed wrong. A search of the Arizona State Bar showed no licensed attorney by that name. Then the search expanded: California, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, other states. National databases. Nothing. Michael Bradford did not appear as a licensed attorney anywhere. That was only the beginning. Judge Judy's team looked deeper and found Bradford's business. His website was full of language designed to impress desperate people. It mentioned legal services, courtroom advocacy, legal guidance and representation. It had testimonials from people who praised him as if he were an attorney. But buried in tiny disclaimers was the truth. He was not a lawyer, he had never been admitted to the bar, he had no license to practice law. He had created a business that lived in the gray area between legal consulting and outright fraud, and he had been using that confusion to take money from people who did not know better. Judge Judy made calls to the State Bar, to prosecutors, and to people who had hired Bradford in the past. What she discovered was disturbing. One former client had lost a home after following Bradford's incompetent advice. Another had been punished by a court after submitting documents Bradford had prepared. Others had paid him thousands, only to realize too late that they had never hired a real lawyer. By the morning of the taping, Judge Judy knew exactly what she was dealing with: a fake lawyer, an entitled client, and an elderly woman who had been bullied into court. Karen, meanwhile, had no fear at all. Before the taping, she had posted online about her upcoming appearance. She bragged that she had hired a real lawyer. She claimed she was going to expose the show and prove that Judge Judy could be beaten. She even posted a smiling photo with Bradford outside the studio, acting as though they were about to attend a celebration instead of a legal hearing. Her friends encouraged her. They told her to destroy Judge Judy. They told her to show everyone who was boss. Karen soaked it in. She never stopped to ask why her lawyer's business card used a Gmail address. She never asked to see a bar number. She never checked the State Bar website. She never requested formal proof of licensing. Because the truth was simple, Karen did not want verification, she wanted validation. And Michael Bradford gave it to her. Inside the courtroom, Maria Chen sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. She wore a simple dress and held a folder filled with documents proving that Karen's fence had been built illegally on her property. She looked nervous. She looked overwhelmed. She was a retired teacher, not a fighter, and sitting across from Karen and her supposed lawyer made her feel outmatched. Karen looked completely different. She sat with smug confidence, leaning back as if the case was already finished. Bradford sat beside her, arranging papers from his briefcase and preparing to perform. Then Judge Judy entered. The room stood. Judge Judy took her seat with the familiar authority of someone who had controlled courtrooms for most of her life. She looked first at Maria, then at Karen, then at Bradford. Her expression revealed very little, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that regular viewers would have recognized immediately. She already knew the bailiff announced the case. Maria Chen was suing Karen Henderson for the cost of removing an illegally built fence and for damage to her property. Judge Judy began with Maria. She asked her to explain what had happened. Maria's voice trembled as she told the story. She explained how she had lived peacefully in her home for 15 years. She described the garden, the parking problem, and the moment she came home to find workers building a fence through her property. She explained that she spent $800 on a professional survey she could barely afford, and that the survey proved the fence crossed 3 feet into her yard. When she showed Karen the survey, Karen laughed and told her to go to court. Judge Judy listened carefully. She made notes. Her expression grew colder with every detail. Then she turned to Karen's table. She looked at Michael Bradford and asked, in a calm voice, whether he was the person representing Karen. Bradford stood. He smoothed his tie, cleared his throat, and introduced himself as Michael Bradford of Bradford Legal Services, representing Miss Henderson. His tone was theatrical. His posture was exaggerated. He sounded less like a real attorney and more like a man acting out a role he had studied from television dramas. Judge Judy asked where his office was located. Bradford gave a vague answer about working in the greater Phoenix metropolitan area and serving clients throughout Arizona. It sounded professional on the surface, but it answered almost nothing. Judge Judy made a note, then she allowed him to proceed. Bradford launched into a long opening statement. He spoke about property rights, homeowner protections, legal precedent, and applicable statutes. He accused Maria's survey company of being unreliable. He insisted Karen had acted in good faith. He claimed this was simply a misunderstanding being exaggerated by a difficult neighbor. Every few sentences, Karen nodded along proudly. She believed he sounded brilliant. Judge Judy did not interrupt. That alone made the room feel uneasy. Normally, she would stop empty rambling almost immediately. But this time she let Bradford keep talking. She let him build the illusion. She let him bury himself under every false display of authority. When he finally finished, Judge Judy leaned forward. She told him it was quite a presentation, then she asked a simple question: in his 15 years of legal experience, how many cases had he personally tried in court? Bradford's smile remained but his eyes shifted. He gave a polished answer about handling numerous matters, focusing on favorable settlements, and avoiding prolonged litigation whenever possible. It sounded smooth, but it did not answer the question. Judge Judy asked again. How many cases had he personally tried in a courtroom? The atmosphere changed. Bradford shifted his weight. His confidence weakened. He tried to redirect the conversation back to the fence dispute, suggesting that his background was not the central issue. That was a mistake. Judge Judy's expression hardened. She told him she had not asked what he believed was efficient. She had asked a direct question, and she expected a direct answer. Again, she asked how many cases he had personally tried. Bradford still did not answer. His face began to redden. Sweat appeared near his hairline. He shuffled papers as if they might rescue him. Judge Judy changed the question. Where did he attend law school? Karen's smile began to disappear. Bradford claimed he had attended a prestigious institution focused on practical legal application. But again he gave no name. Judge Judy leaned back. Then she asked the question that every real attorney could answer immediately. What year were you admitted to the bar? Silence. Bradford's face drained of color. He tried to say his credentials were not relevant to a property dispute. The courtroom murmured. Even people with no legal training understood that a person claiming to represent someone in court had to be able to prove he was actually a lawyer. Karen sat upright now, her earlier arrogance collapsing into concern. Judge Judy raised her hand and silenced the room. Then she told Bradford his credentials were very relevant, because she had spent the previous evening making calls. She had contacted the Arizona State Bar. There was no attorney named Michael Bradford licensed in Arizona. She had expanded the search to neighboring states. Nothing. Her research team had checked national databases. Still nothing. Karen gasped. She turned toward Bradford, suddenly desperate, and demanded that he tell Judge Judy he was a lawyer. She told him to show the license, show the proof, say something. But Bradford stood frozen. Judge Judy continued. She explained that she had also spoken with the district attorney's office, and that they were very interested in a man who appeared to be practicing law without a license. She also spoke with former clients who had paid him thousands for legal help, and later discovered he had no legal authority at all. The courtroom erupted in shock. What began as a fence dispute had become a fraud exposure in real time. Judge Judy then asked Bradford one final time, was he, or was he not, a licensed attorney? The silence felt endless. Bradford stood there sweating, trembling, trapped by the truth. Finally, in a weak voice, he admitted it. No, he was not a licensed attorney. The courtroom exploded. Karen screamed, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. She shouted that he had lied to her. She screamed that she had paid him $3,500. She called him a liar and tried to move toward him, swinging her handbag wildly as the bailiff stepped in to stop her. Bradford barely reacted. He looked defeated, like a man who knew the walls had closed in. Judge Judy struck her gavel and restored order. She ordered Karen to sit down. Karen collapsed into her chair, sobbing. The woman who had entered the courtroom with such arrogance was now falling apart in front of everyone. Judge Judy turned to Bradford. Her voice was cold and precise. She told him he had been running a criminal operation, taking money from people who believed they were hiring real legal help. She said he had charged attorney fees, prepared documents, presented himself as having legal expertise, and misled vulnerable people. That was not just poor judgment, that was fraud, that was theft, that was the unauthorized practice of law. Then Judge Judy turned to the bailiff and instructed him to detain Bradford for the authorities. As if perfectly timed, uniformed officers entered the courtroom. The realization hit everyone at once. This had not been spontaneous. Judge Judy had prepared for this. Bradford's legs seemed weak as the officers approached. They placed handcuffs on his wrists, and the sound of the cuffs locking echoed through the room. His briefcase remained on the floor, abandoned like evidence from a crime scene. Karen watched in horror as the man she had trusted to win her case was led away. But Judge Judy was not finished. She turned back to Karen Henderson. She said, it was time to talk about Karen's role. Karen immediately claimed she was a victim too. She said she did not know Bradford was fake. She said he told her he was licensed. She said she had paid him good money. Judge Judy asked whether Karen had checked his bar license. Karen said nothing. Judge Judy asked whether she had looked him up on the state bar website. Again, silence. Judge Judy asked whether she had requested any credentials at all. Karen had no answer. Judge Judy laid out the truth plainly. Bradford charged far less than a real attorney. He promised guaranteed results. He said exactly what Karen wanted to hear. And Karen did not ask questions because she liked the arrangement. She wanted someone to help her bully Maria Chen. She wanted someone to justify the illegal fence. She wanted someone who would support her harassment. And as long as Bradford served that purpose, she did not care enough to verify whether he was legitimate. Then Judge Judy revealed she had also looked into Karen's background. This was not Karen's first courtroom fight with a neighbor. She had filed multiple small claims cases before. In some of them, she had won by default because her neighbors did not appear or could not afford to defend themselves properly. Judge Judy said Karen had been using the legal system like a weapon. Then she picked up Maria's survey. The document was clear. The fence was 3 feet inside Maria's property. It had been built illegally. Judge Judy said Karen knew exactly what she was doing. She built the fence after Maria asked her to stop blocking the driveway. She did it to punish her. Then, when Maria proved she was right, Karen hired a con man to continue the harassment in court. Karen sobbed harder. Her body shook. Her makeup ran down her face. The confident woman who had walked in expecting victory had been reduced to a humiliated defendant with no defense left. Judge Judy delivered her ruling, judgment for Maria Chen in the amount of $5,000. That money would cover the cost of removing the illegal fence, repairing the property damage, and compensating Maria for the harassment she had endured, but Judge Judy added, more. She said the case would be referred to the district attorney's office for review. If investigators determined that Karen knew or should have known Bradford was not a real attorney, she could face further consequences. Maria began to cry, but this time from relief, after years of dealing with Karen's behavior, after losing part of her garden, after being dragged into court by a woman who wanted to intimidate her, she had finally been heard. Judge Judy looked toward the camera and delivered a warning. If you hire a lawyer, verify their credentials. It takes moments to check with the state bar, and if someone is charging far below market rates while promising guaranteed victories, that is not a bargain. That is a warning sign. She also warned those who use courts to bully others that accountability eventually arrives. The gavel came down, the case was over, but the aftermath had only begun. When the episode aired, the clip spread across social media at incredible speed. Viewers replayed the moment Bradford admitted he was not a lawyer. They shared Karen's screaming breakdown. They praised Judge Judy's calm but devastating takedown. The phrase fake lawyer Karen began trending online. Legal experts discussed the case as an example of why credentials matter. News outlets covered the story. Law professors used it to explain the dangers of unauthorized legal practice. Michael Bradford was eventually charged with multiple counts connected to fraud, theft, and practicing law without a license. Investigators discovered that he had taken money from more than 20 clients and caused real harm. Some had lost cases, some had lost property, some had suffered legal consequences because they died to trust a man who had no right to represent them. He was sentenced to prison and ordered to repay his victims. Karen Henderson faced consequences of her own. The judgment against her, combined with the money she had already paid Bradford, damaged her financially. But the social cost was even worse. Her neighbors who had endured her behavior for years, finally saw her exposed. She was forced to remove the illegal fence. Maria's garden was repaired with help from community members who had watched the episode and wanted to support her. Eventually, Karen sold her house and moved away. But her reputation followed her. The video remained online. Her arrogance, her fake lawyer, her courtroom humiliation, all of it became part of a story people would repeat for years. The case became legendary because it was more than entertainment. It showed a real fraud being exposed. It showed a vulnerable woman being protected. It showed a bully being stopped. And it reminded millions of viewers that the legal system is not a playground for people who think rules only apply to others. Karen Henderson walked into Judge Judy's courtroom believing she had power, she had money, she had confidence, she had a man she thought was a lawyer. But she did not have the truth. And in that courtroom, truth was the only thing that mattered. She tried to intimidate her neighbor. She tried to use a fake legal expert. She tried to turn the courtroom into another stage for her arrogance. Instead, she watched her entire case collapse, her fake attorney get arrested, and her own reputation become a public example of what happens when entitlement meets accountability. Michael Bradford thought he could fool one more client, one more courtroom, one more judge. Karen Henderson thought she could bully one more neighbor. But both of them made the same fatal mistake. They underestimated Judge Judy.